8 months at sea, 243 days aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, navigating through waters that tested every ounce of my training and resolve. When the carrier finally docked at Norfolk, I felt that familiar mix of exhaustion and anticipation that comes with every homecoming. But this time, something else pulled at me. Something deeper than the usual longing for solid ground and home-cooked meals. I needed to see my mother. Not her, of course. She had been gone for 15 years now, but her corner, the small office space in my childhood home where my father had preserved her memory in a beautiful shadow box. Her purple heart, her bronze star, the ribbons and insignia that told the story of Commander Sarah Donovan, a woman who had saved her entire crew during an engine room explosion and earned every honor the Navy could bestow. I drove straight from base to the house in Virginia Beach. My uniform was still crisp, my bag still packed in the trunk. I had not called ahead. I rarely did anymore. The conversations with my father had become strained over the years, filtered through Vicky's constant presence and her thinly veiled disapproval of everything I represented. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, and immediately something felt wrong. The house smelled different. Lavender and eucalyptus instead of the wood polish my mother had always used. New furniture in the living room. Family photos on the wall that somehow did not include me. I walked down the hallway toward the office. My boots echoed against hardwood floors that had been refinished in a lighter shade. When I reached the door, I froze. The room was gone. Not the physical space, but everything that had made it sacred. My mother's oak desk had been replaced with yoga mats and meditation cushions. The bookshelves that once held her naval history collection now displayed candles and crystals. And the wall where her shadow box had hung for 15 years, was painted a soft sage green, completely bare except for a single abstract painting. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My hand reached out automatically, touching the empty space where her medals should have been. The paint was smooth under my fingertips, cold. My phone was in my hand before I realized I was dialing. My father answered on the third ring. "Rachel, I thought you were still deployed." "Where are they?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. Years of commanding sailors through crisis had trained me to compartmentalize, to push emotion aside until the situation was handled. "Where are what?" "Mom's medals, her shadow box, everything." The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. "Honey, Vicky thought it was time to redecorate. That room was just sitting there collecting dust, and she needed a space for her yoga practice." "Where are the medals?" Another pause. "There was an auction. A few months ago, military memorabilia collectors, very reputable. Vicky handled the whole thing." The room tilted slightly. I put my hand against the sage green wall to steady myself. "You sold them." "The money went to a good cause. Megan's 28th birthday party at the country club. You should have seen it, Rachel. 300 guests, live band, the whole 9 yards." I ended the call without another word. My legs carried me to the kitchen, where a small trash can sat beneath the sink. Inside, beneath coffee grounds and junk mail, I found it. A crumpled receipt from the auction house. Individual line items that reduced my mother's entire legacy to dollar amounts. Purple Heart, $1,800. Bronze Star, $1,400. Service ribbons and insignia, $1,000. Total, $4,200. $4,200. That was what Commander Sarah Donovan's sacrifice was worth to this family. The price of champagne and canapes for my stepsister's birthday party. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Vicky left 3 days ago. I pressed play. "Rachel, it's Vicky. I'm sure your father mentioned the redecorating. I know you're always so attached to your mother's things, but honestly, you're at sea most of the time anyway. Who were those medals really for? It was time for this family to move on. Call me when you get back. We can have lunch." I listened to it twice, then a third time. Each word landed like a depth charge, exploding somewhere deep in my chest where I had buried 15 years of silence. I looked at the receipt in my hand. The Purple Heart my mother earned while dragging wounded sailors to safety. The Bronze Star for valor under fire. Sold. Gone. Scattered to strangers who would never know the woman who earned them. My fingers tightened around the paper until it crumpled in my fist. "You can sell the medals," I whispered to the empty house, "but you can never erase the sacrifice." I stayed in that house for another hour, walking through rooms that no longer felt like mine. Every corner held evidence of erasure. The family photos in the hallway told a story where I barely existed. There was Vicky and my father on their wedding day, her white dress pristine and her smile triumphant. Megan's high school graduation. Megan's college graduation. A family vacation to Hawaii that I had not been invited to because I was probably busy with your boat thing anyway. My mother's face appeared nowhere on those walls. Neither did mine. I paused at one photo near the staircase. It showed Megan, my father, and Vicky at some country club event, all dressed in their finest. The caption on the back read, "Our perfect family, summer 2022. Our, as if I had never existed. As if Commander Sarah Donovan had never lived in this house, never raised her daughter here, never filled these halls with laughter and love. I finally left as the sun began to set, driving to a hotel near the base rather than staying in what had once been my childhood home. The room was small and impersonal, exactly what I needed. Sleep did not come that night. Instead, I lay in the darkness and let the memories wash over me like waves against a carrier's hull. My mother had been everything to me. Commander Sarah Donovan was not just a decorated Navy officer. She was the woman who taught me to tie my shoes with infinite patience when I struggled. She held me when I had nightmares about monsters under my bed. She showed me that strength and tenderness could exist in the same heart, that commanding a ship and baking cookies with your daughter were not contradictions, but complementary parts of a full life. She commanded respect on the deck of every ship she served on. Her sailors would have followed her into any storm, but at home, she was simply Mom. The one who made pancakes shaped like anchors on Sunday mornings. The one who let me wear her officer's cover around the house and salute myself in the mirror. The one who told me I could be anything, do anything, as long as I did it with honor. I was 14 when she earned her Bronze Star. The official report said that an engine room explosion aboard the USS Constellation had killed 3 sailors instantly and left 7 more trapped behind a wall of fire and twisted metal. My mother, then a lieutenant commander, had been on her way to the bridge when the blast hit. Protocol would have supported her decision to let the damage control teams handle it. She was needed on the bridge. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she turned around and ran directly into the flames. She pulled 4 sailors out herself, suffering second-degree burns across her arms and back that would leave scars she carried for the rest of her life. She organized the remaining rescue efforts, barking orders through the smoke and chaos with a voice that cut through the noise like a beacon. She refused medical treatment until every survivor was accounted for, until every name on the roster had been checked. The Navy gave her a Bronze Star for valor. The sailors she saved gave her something more valuable: their loyalty, their respect, their lives continuing forward because she refused to leave them behind. She told me about that day only once, when I was 17 and struggling to decide whether to apply to the Naval Academy or pursue a normal college experience like my friends. "Rachel," she said, sitting beside me on the back porch as the summer sun set over the water, her scarred forearms visible beneath her rolled-up sleeves. "The Navy will ask everything of you. Your time, your comfort, sometimes your safety. But it will give you something in return that nothing else can: purpose. A family that spans oceans. The knowledge that when it mattered most, you did not look away. That is worth more than any easy path." I chose the Navy. She smiled when I told her, a smile that lit up her entire face. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months later. The disease moved fast, faster than any of us expected. By the time I finished my first semester at Annapolis, she was in hospice care. I received emergency leave to come home, and I spent her final week sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, trying to memorize every line on her face. The way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. The gray streaks in her dark hair. The strength that remained in her grip even as her body failed her. On her last day, she was lucid for only a few hours. She used that precious time to talk to me, not about her pain or her fear, but about the future. "Carry the anchor forward. she whispered, her voice barely audible. That is what we do, Rachel. We carry it forward. For the ones who came before, for the ones who will come after. Promise me. Don't let them forget. I promised her I would not. I held her hand until she slipped away, and I wore my midshipman uniform to her funeral because I knew it would have made her proud. My father fell apart after she died. I understood that. Grief does strange things to people, and they had loved each other deeply for over 20 years of marriage. What I did not understand was how quickly he let that love be replaced, how easily he allowed a new woman to fill the space my mother had left. 18 months, that was all it took. 18 months after lowering my mother into the ground, my father married Victoria Chen, a woman he met at a grief support group. Vicky had never served a day in uniform. She had been married twice before, and she had a daughter named Megan from her first marriage. I was at officer candidate school when they got married. My father called to tell me the news 3 days before the ceremony. I could not get leave on such short notice, but I suspect that was intentional. Vicky did not want the ghost of Sarah Donovan's daughter standing in her wedding photos, a living reminder of the woman who came before. The erasure began slowly. My mother's cookbook moved from the kitchen counter to a box in the garage. Her favorite reading chair was reupholstered in a fabric she would have hated. The garden she had tended for years was ripped out and replaced with low-maintenance landscaping that required nothing but indifference. Then it accelerated. By the time I graduated from OCS, the living room had been completely redecorated. By my first posting aboard the USS Nimitz, my mother's clothes had been donated to charity without anyone asking if I wanted to keep anything. By the time I made lieutenant junior grade, the only evidence that Commander Sarah Donovan had ever lived in that house was the shadow box in the office and a single framed photo that my father kept hidden in his nightstand drawer. Vicky never missed an opportunity to diminish me or my career. When I called home to share news of my promotion to lieutenant, she answered the phone and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Megan just got accepted to her first choice sorority. Your father is so proud." When I received my first commendation, she asked if the Navy gave those out to everyone who showed up. When I was assigned as executive officer aboard a destroyer, she told family friends that I had some sort of desk job on a boat. My father never corrected her, not once. Last year, I led a rescue operation during a fire aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. 32 sailors trapped below deck. I organized the response, directed the evacuation, and personally pulled 2 unconscious petty officers from a compartment minutes away from flashover. The Navy awarded me the Distinguished Service Medal. Rear Admiral James Morrison pinned it on my chest and told me my mother would have been proud. I never told my father. I had learned that sharing achievements only invited dismissal. But I thought the shadow box was safe. That small corner where my mother's medals hung was the one thing I trusted my father to protect. The one piece of her legacy even Vicky could not touch. I was wrong. Lying in that hotel room, I realized I had spent 15 years surrendering to people who saw my mother's memory as an inconvenience and my existence as an afterthought. Something shifted inside me that night, something cold and deliberate. The same feeling I had when alarms blared aboard ship and split-second decisions meant life or death. I was done being silent. The next morning, I began my mission. I approached the recovery of my mother's medals the same way I would approach any naval operation, with careful planning, thorough research, and absolute determination. I contacted the auction house first, explaining the situation and requesting the names of the buyers. They were hesitant at first, citing privacy concerns, but when I explained that the medals had been sold without the consent of the veterans' next of kin, they agreed to help. The auction house provided me with a list of 4 buyers. The service ribbons had gone to a collector in Texas who specialized in naval memorabilia. My mother's officer insignia had been purchased by a small military museum in Virginia. Her bronze star was now in the possession of a private collector in Maryland. And her Purple Heart, the medal that meant the most to me, had been bought by a man named William Chen in Norfolk. I started making calls. The collector in Texas was sympathetic but firm. He had paid fair market value for the ribbons, and while he expressed condolences for my loss, he was not willing to part with them without compensation. The museum in Virginia was more understanding. When I explained that the items had been sold without authorization, they offered to return the insignia at cost, no questions asked. The Maryland collector did not return my calls. But William Chen did. When I reached him, his voice carried a warmth that surprised me. "Commander Donovan," he said, and the use of my rank caught my attention immediately. "I was hoping you would call. You know who I am." "I know who your mother was," he replied. The moment I saw that purple heart at auction, I recognized the name, Sarah Donovan. I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out why her medal was being sold before I finally gave up and bought it myself. I couldn't let it go to someone who wouldn't understand what it meant. I gripped the phone tighter. "How did you know her?" "I didn't, but my uncle did. Petty Officer Second Class Michael Chen. He was one of the sailors your mother pulled out of that engine room fire on the Constellation. He spent the rest of his life telling anyone who would listen about the officer who ran into the flames when everyone else was running out." My throat tightened. I remembered my mother mentioning the sailors she saved, but she rarely spoke their names. She always said the recognition belonged to the men and women who survived, not to her. "Your uncle," I managed. "Is he still?" "He passed in 2019, but before he died, he made me promise that if I ever had the chance to honor Commander Donovan's memory, I would take it. When I saw that medal at auction, I knew this was my chance." He paused. "I want to return it to you, Commander. It never should have been sold in the first place." I did not know what to say. After 15 years of having my mother's memory dismissed and erased, here was a stranger who understood her sacrifice better than my own family. "Mr. Chen, I can't ask you to do that. You paid for it." "You're not asking, I'm offering. My uncle would haunt me from the grave if I kept this medal from Sarah Donovan's daughter." I could hear the smile in his voice. "Besides, I did some research after I bought it. I know about your service record, Commander, the Distinguished Service Medal, the rescue operation on the Roosevelt. You're not just her daughter, you're her legacy. That Purple Heart belongs with you." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed a number I recognized immediately. Rear Admiral James Morrison, my commanding officer. "Mr. Chen, I need to take this. Can I call you back?" "Of course, and Commander, your mother would be proud of you, I'm sure of it." I switched to the incoming call, my heart rate slightly elevated. Admiral Morrison rarely called directly. Usually, communications went through official channels or his aide. "Commander Donovan, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Admiral. What can I do for you?" "I received an interesting phone call this morning," he said, "from a Mr. William Chen. He told me quite a story about your mother's medals being sold at auction without your knowledge. Is this true?" I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to bring personal family drama into my professional life. But Admiral Morrison had always been direct with me, and I owed him the same courtesy. "Yes, sir. My stepmother sold them while I was deployed. I've been trying to track them down." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Admiral Morrison spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Commander, I knew your mother. Did you know that?" I blinked. "No, sir, I didn't." "She was 2 years ahead of me at the academy. We served together briefly on the USS Enterprise before our paths diverged. She was one of the finest officers I ever knew. The kind of leader who made everyone around her better just by being in the room." He cleared his throat. "When I heard what happened to her medals, let's say I was not pleased." "Sir, I appreciate that, but this is a personal matter. I don't want to involve." "Commander, I'm retiring next month. Did you know that?" The change in topic threw me. "I had heard rumors, sir." "The ceremony is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Naval Station Norfolk, 300 officers and guests. My wife has been planning it for 6 months." He paused again. "I would like you to attend. In fact, I'm formally requesting your presence." "Of course, Admiral. I would be honored." "Good, and Commander, wear your dress whites. Bring your family if you wish. There's something I want to do, and I think you should be there to see it." The way he said it made me pause. There was something in his tone, a careful deliberateness that reminded me of briefings before major operations. Something was being planned, and I was only seeing part of the picture. "Admiral, what exactly are you planning?" "Your mother spent her career protecting her crew. She never asked for recognition. She never sought the spotlight. But sometimes, Commander, the spotlight finds you anyway." His voice hardened with purpose. "I've spent 40 years in this Navy, and I'll be damned if I retire without honoring the legacy of one of its finest officers, both of them." I understood then. He was not just planning his retirement ceremony. He was planning something more, a public recognition, a statement. For 15 years, I had chosen silence to keep the peace. I had swallowed my pride and my pain to avoid conflict with Vicky and my father. I had let my mother's memory be erased piece by piece because fighting back seemed too exhausting, too pointless. But this was different. Admiral Morrison was offering me a choice. I could decline, ask him to keep the ceremony focused on his own achievements, and continue my quiet existence in the margins of my family's awareness. Or I could step forward. I could let my mother's sacrifice be recognized publicly, in front of the naval community that had been her true family. The memory of my mother's voice echoed in my mind. "Carry the anchor forward. Don't let them forget." I had made her a promise 15 years ago. It was time to keep it. "Admiral Morrison," I said, my voice steady, "what do you need me to do?" The 3 weeks leading up to Admiral Morrison's retirement ceremony were the longest of my life. Every day brought new developments, new preparations, and new reasons to doubt whether I was doing the right thing. But every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's shadow box hanging on that wall. I saw the empty space where it should have been, and I knew I could not turn back. Admiral Morrison had laid out the plan during our phone call with military precision. He would pause his retirement speech to honor my mother's memory and present her recovered medals. William Chen had already agreed to participate, to share his uncle's story and return the Purple Heart personally. The museum in Virginia had shipped back my mother's insignia. Even the collector in Texas, after hearing the full story from Admiral Morrison himself, had agreed to return the service ribbons at no cost. The only piece still missing was the bronze star from the Maryland collector, but Admiral Morrison assured me his staff was working on it. "The naval community takes care of its own," he had said. "When word gets out about what happened, that collector will be facing pressure from every veterans organization in the country. He'll come around." The hardest part was not the logistics. It was the invitation. I stared at my phone for nearly an hour before finally sending the text to my father. "There's a ceremony at Naval Station Norfolk in 3 weeks. Rear Admiral Morrison's retirement. I've been asked to attend, and I would like you and Vicky to be there. It would mean a lot to me." His response came quickly, which surprised me. "Of course, honey, we'd love to come. Vicky will be excited to see the base." I doubted that very much, but I kept my skepticism to myself. A second message followed moments later. "Should Megan come too? She's been asking about you." I stared at that message for a long time. Megan had never asked about me in her life. Every interaction we had ever had was filtered through Vicky's influence, shaped by her mother's casual cruelty. But something petty and sharp inside me wanted her there. I wanted all of them there, seated in the guest section, watching as everything they had dismissed was laid bare before 300 naval officers. "She's welcome to attend," I typed back. "Dress code is formal. This is an important event." His reply was a simple thumbs-up emoji. No questions about why the ceremony was important to me. No curiosity about my role in it. Just acknowledgement that he had received the information, the same way he might acknowledge a reminder about a dentist appointment. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait. The days passed slowly. I returned to duty aboard the Roosevelt, throwing myself into work to keep my mind occupied. My crew noticed the change in me. Petty Officer Williams, who had served under me for 3 years, finally asked about it during a quiet moment on the bridge. "Commander, permission to speak freely." "Granted." "Something's different about you, ma'am. The last few weeks you've been." I don't know, more focused than usual, like you're preparing for something. I considered how to respond. Williams had been one of the sailors I pulled from the fire. He had nearly died that day, would have died if the rescue had been delayed by even 5 more minutes. He deserved honesty. I am preparing for something, I said. Something personal, family business that I should have handled a long time ago. He nodded slowly. Well, whatever it is, the crew has your back. You know that, right? Every single one of us. His words stayed with me as the ceremony approached. That was the difference, I realized, between my Navy family and my biological one. Aboard ship, loyalty was earned through action, through shared sacrifice, through being there when it mattered. My crew respected me because I had proven myself worthy of respect. My father and Vicky expected my deference simply because of blood and marriage, while giving nothing in return. 1 week before the ceremony, Admiral Morrison called with an update. "The Bronze Star is secured," he said without preamble. "The collector in Maryland had a change of heart after receiving calls from 3 different veterans organizations and the Navy League. He's shipping it to Norfolk as we speak." Relief washed over me. "All of them, we have all of them back." "We do. Commander, I need to tell you something else. I've been in contact with several officers who served with your mother. Word has spread about what we're doing, and the response has been significant. I've had to expand the guest list twice. We're now expecting over 400 attendees. 400 people, 400 members of the naval community, gathering to honor my mother's memory. The contrast to what Vicky had done was stark and painful. She had sold my mother's legacy for $4,000. Now 400 people were coming to celebrate it. Admiral, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet, Commander. Thank me after. There's still a lot that can go wrong." He was right, of course. The ceremony was complex, with multiple moving parts and the ever-present possibility that something could derail the plan. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The night before the ceremony, I laid out my dress whites on the bed in my hotel room and ran my hands over the fabric. The uniform was immaculate, every medal in place, every crease sharp. I had spent an hour polishing my insignia until they gleamed. I wanted to look perfect. I wanted to look like my mother. My phone buzzed with a text from Vicky. "Rachel, we've arrived at the hotel. What time should we meet you tomorrow? Your father wants to have breakfast." I stared at the message, reading it several times. The casual normalcy of it made my stomach turn. She had no idea what was coming. None of them did. They thought this was just another boring military obligation, another of my little parades that they had to endure to maintain the appearance of family unity. "I'll meet you at the ceremony," I typed back. "I need to arrive early for preparations. The event starts at 1400. Don't be late." Her response was dismissive, predictable. "Fine. Megan isn't thrilled about spending her Saturday at a military thing, but we'll be there." I set the phone down and walked to the window. Norfolk spread out before me, the lights of the naval station visible in the distance. Somewhere out there, my mother's medals were waiting to come home. Somewhere out there, 400 officers were preparing to honor her sacrifice. And somewhere in a nearby hotel, my stepmother was probably complaining about having to attend while my father nodded along passively, and my stepsister scrolled through her phone, counting the hours until she could escape back to her comfortable life. You can sell the medals, I thought, but you can never erase the sacrifice. Tomorrow, they would learn just how true that was. I barely slept that night. My mind kept running through the ceremony, imagining every possible scenario. What if Vicky caused a scene? What if my father tried to leave early? What if something went wrong with the presentation and the moment fell flat? But beneath the anxiety, something else simmered. A quiet certainty that had been building for weeks. This was right. This was necessary. For 15 years, I had been carrying a weight I never should have shouldered alone. Tomorrow, I would set it down. The morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a military event. I dressed slowly, methodically, treating each step like a sacred ritual. The undershirt first, crisp and white. Then the trousers, the shirt, the jacket, each medal pinned in precise position. My mother's academy ring on my right hand, the one piece of her that Vicky had never been able to touch because I had been wearing it the day she died. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw my mother looking back. The same dark hair, now pinned up under my cover. The same determined set to the jaw. The same eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. "I kept my promise, Mom," I whispered to my reflection. "I carried the anchor forward. Now it's time to show them what that means." My phone buzzed with messages from fellow officers offering support and encouragement. Word had spread through the fleet about what was happening today. The naval community was rallying behind me, behind my mother's memory, in a way that made my throat tight with emotion. One message stood out from the rest. It was from William Chen, the man who had bought my mother's Purple Heart. "Commander Donovan, I'm on my way to the ceremony now. I have the medal with me. I've thought a lot about what I want to say today about my uncle and your mother and what her sacrifice meant to our family. I hope I can do her justice." "You will," I typed back. "Thank you for everything you've done." His response was simple but powerful. "Thank your mother. She's the one who saved my uncle's life. I'm just returning the favor 1 generation later." I left the hotel at noon, giving myself plenty of time to arrive at the base and coordinate with Admiral Morrison's staff. The drive was quiet, the radio off, my thoughts focused on the hours ahead. By the time I pulled through the gates of Naval Station Norfolk, I felt calmer than I had in weeks. This was my world. These were my people. Whatever happened with my family today, I would face it surrounded by the community that had raised me after my mother's death. The community that had given me purpose and identity when my biological family offered only dismissal. The ceremony space was already bustling with activity when I arrived. Rows of chairs stretched across the parade ground, enough to seat the 400 guests Admiral Morrison had mentioned. A raised platform stood at the front, draped with naval flags and adorned with flowers. To one side, I spotted a table covered with a blue cloth, and my heart skipped when I realized what it must contain. My mother's medals, all of them, waiting to come home. Admiral Morrison found me near the platform, his own dress whites immaculate, his face carrying the weight of 40 years of service. "Commander Donovan, are you ready?" I looked out at the empty chairs that would soon be filled with officers and their families. I thought about my father and Vicky and Megan, making their way to the base right now, probably complaining about traffic and parking and the inconvenience of spending their Saturday at a military event. They had no idea what was coming. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'm ready." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of final preparations and nervous anticipation. I took my place among the assembled officers in the front rows, exchanging nods and handshakes with colleagues I had served with over the years. Word had spread through the fleet about what was happening today, and I could feel the weight of their support like a warm current beneath the surface formality of the occasion. At precisely 13:45, I spotted my family arriving at the guest entrance. My father walked in first, looking uncomfortable in his navy blue suit, the one he wore to every formal occasion because Vicky refused to let him buy a new one. Behind him came Vicky herself, resplendent in a designer dress that probably cost more than my mother's bronze star had sold for at auction. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup perfect, her expression one of barely concealed boredom. And trailing behind them both was Megan, thumbs already flying across her phone screen, completely disengaged from her surroundings. A young ensign directed them to seats in the family and guest section, about 10 rows back from the platform. I watched Vicky's face as she surveyed the assembled officers, the flags, the formal military precision of it all. Her lip curled slightly, the same expression she wore whenever she was forced to acknowledge my career existed. She had no idea she was walking into her own reckoning. I turned back to face the platform as the ceremony began. At exactly 1400, a color guard marched onto the parade ground, flags snapping in the light breeze. The national anthem played, and 400 people rose as one, hands over hearts or raised in salute. I stood at attention, my eyes fixed straight ahead, my heart pounding beneath my ribbons. Ceremony proceeded with the solemn dignity befitting 40 years of distinguished service. Speaker after speaker took the podium to honor Rear Admiral James Morrison's career. His first commanding officer, now in his 80s, spoke about the young ensign who had shown such promise. Fellow admirals recounted joint operations and strategic victories. His wife of 35 years spoke about the sacrifices military families make and the strength it takes to love someone who belongs, in part, to the sea. Through it all, I remained still, waiting, my mother's academy ring pressing against my finger like a heartbeat. Finally, Admiral Morrison himself took the podium. He spoke eloquently about his career, about the honor of serving his country, about the sailors and officers who had shaped him into the leader he had become. He thanked his family, his mentors, his friends. The audience listened with respectful attention, knowing that this was a man worthy of their time and admiration. Then, about 20 minutes into his speech, he paused. The silence stretched for several seconds. I saw a few people shift in their seats, uncertain. Admiral Morrison looked out over the crowd, and his gaze found me in the front row. He gave me the slightest nod. It was time. Before I close this chapter of my life, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the parade ground, I must take a moment to speak about something that weighs heavily on my heart. Something that concerns the very meaning of service, sacrifice, and honor. I heard a rustle from the guest section. Vicky was probably checking her watch, wondering how much longer this would take. Many of you know that I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1985. What fewer of you know is that there was a woman in the class ahead of me who changed my understanding of what it meant to be an officer. Her name was Sarah Donovan. At the mention of my mother's name, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Several of the older officers sat up straighter, recognition dawning on their faces. Commander Sarah Donovan served with distinction for 22 years before cancer took her from us far too soon. During her career, she earned the Bronze Star for valor after running into a burning engine room aboard the USS Constellation to rescue trapped sailors. She earned a Purple Heart for wounds sustained in the line of duty. She earned the respect and admiration of every person who ever served alongside her. Admiral Morrison paused again, and his expression hardened. Recently, I learned that Commander Donovan's medals, her Purple Heart and Bronze Star, her service ribbons and insignia, were sold at auction without the knowledge or consent of her daughter. They were sold to fund a birthday party. The murmur became a gasp. I kept my eyes fixed forward, but I could feel the energy in the crowd shifting. Shock, anger, disbelief. The naval community does not forget its own, Admiral Morrison continued. When word spread about what had happened to Commander Donovan's legacy, something remarkable occurred. Collectors who had purchased her medals reached out. Veterans' organizations applied pressure. And one man in particular, whose uncle's life was saved by Commander Donovan during that engine room fire, purchased her Purple Heart for one purpose only, to return it to her family. He turned slightly and gestured to William Chen, who rose from his seat in the front row and walked to the platform carrying a small wooden box. The crowd watched in absolute silence as he climbed the steps and stood beside Admiral Morrison. Commander Rachel Donovan, Admiral Morrison called out, his voice ringing across the parade ground. Please approach. The moment I had been preparing for had arrived. I rose from my seat, my movements precise and controlled, and walked toward the platform. Every eye in the crowd followed me. I could feel the weight of their attention like sunlight on my skin. As I climbed the steps, I allowed myself one glance toward the guest section. My father's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Megan had finally put down her phone, her mouth hanging open. And Vicky sat frozen in her seat, her perfect composure cracking as she realized that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong with her carefully constructed narrative. I took my place beside Admiral Morrison and stood at attention. Commander Rachel Donovan is not just Sarah Donovan's daughter, Admiral Morrison announced to the crowd. She is a decorated officer in her own right. Last year, she led rescue operations during a fire aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, personally pulling 2 unconscious sailors from a compartment that was minutes away from flashover. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for her actions. She has served this Navy with the same courage, dedication, and selflessness that defined her mother's career. He turned to the table covered with blue cloth and lifted the fabric, revealing my mother's medals arranged in a new shadow box. The Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, the service ribbons and insignia, all of them recovered and restored. Today, we return these medals to their rightful place, with the family that earned them. William Chen stepped forward, holding the wooden box containing the Purple Heart. His hands were steady, but I could see emotion glistening in his eyes. "Commander Donovan," he said, his voice carrying to the crowd despite its softness. "My uncle, Petty Officer Second Class Michael Chen, served aboard the USS Constellation. He was one of the sailors trapped in that engine room fire in 1988. He would have died that day if your mother had not run into the flames to pull him out." He paused, collecting himself. "My uncle passed away in 2019, but before he died, he made me promise that if I ever had the chance to honor Commander Sarah Donovan's memory, I would take it. When I saw her Purple Heart at auction, I knew this was my chance. I bought it not to keep, but to return. This medal belongs with you, Commander. It belongs with the daughter who followed in her mother's footsteps and became a hero in her own right." He opened the wooden box and lifted the Purple Heart, its ribbon catching the afternoon light. The crowd held its breath as he pinned it to the shadow box beside the Bronze Star. Admiral Morrison turned to face the assembled officers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise." 400 people stood as one, officers in dress whites, veterans in civilian clothes with medals on their chests, families who understood what sacrifice meant. They rose and they saluted. Not just Admiral Morrison on his retirement day. They saluted my mother. They saluted me. They saluted the legacy that someone had tried to sell for the price of champagne and canapés. I stood at attention on that platform, my mother's medals gleaming beside me, and I felt something I had not felt in 15 years. I felt seen. I felt honored. I felt like Commander Sarah Donovan's daughter, carrying the anchor forward just as I had promised. The jumbotron behind the platform flickered to life, displaying a photograph I had not seen in years. My mother in her dress whites, standing proud and strong, her medals gleaming on her chest. Beside it appeared a recent photograph of me in the same uniform, the same posture, the same determination in my eyes. Mother and daughter, 2 generations of service, a legacy that no auction could ever truly sell. I looked out at the crowd, at the 400 faces watching this moment, and I finally allowed myself to turn toward the guest section. My father had tears streaming down his face. Whether from pride or shame or some complicated mixture of both, I could not tell. Megan looked like she wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole, her face burning red as she finally understood what her birthday party had really cost. And Vicky sat absolutely still, her face a mask of barely contained fury and dawning horror. She had expected to spend this Saturday enduring another of my little parades. Instead, she was watching her cruelty exposed before the entire naval community she had dismissed for 15 years. Every officer's wife in attendance knew what she had done. Every veteran who had ever served knew what she had done. Every family member who understood the meaning of sacrifice knew what she had done. There was nowhere to hide, no way to spin the narrative, no dismissive comment that could undo what 400 witnesses had just seen. Admiral Morrison leaned toward me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Your mother would be proud of you, Commander. I hope you know that." I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. "Now," he said, returning to his normal volume, "let us conclude this ceremony by honoring both Admiral Morrison's distinguished career and the Donovan legacy that continues to inspire us all." The applause that followed was thunderous, rolling across the parade ground like waves against a carrier's hull. I stood at attention and let it wash over me, let it fill the spaces that 15 years of silence had hollowed out. This was my Navy. These were my people. And no one, not Vicky, not my father, not anyone, could ever take that away from me. The formal ceremony concluded with the traditional passing of the flag and Admiral Morrison's final salute. As the color guard marched away and the crowd began to disperse toward the reception area, I descended from the platform carrying my mother's shadow box. The weight of it in my hands felt sacred, like holding a piece of her soul that had been lost and finally found again. Officers approached me one by one, offering handshakes and words of respect. Some had served with my mother. Others had only heard the stories, but all of them understood what this moment meant. "Your mother was one of the finest officers I ever knew," said a gray-haired captain whose name tag read Harrison. "I was a young ensign on the Constellation when she pulled those men out of that fire. I've never forgotten it. What happened to her medals was a disgrace, but today made it right." "Commander Donovan, I served under your mother on the Enterprise," another officer said, her voice thick with emotion. "She taught me everything I know about leadership. I'm so glad her legacy is being honored properly." I thanked each of them, accepting their condolences and their praise with the quiet dignity my mother had always modeled. But even as I spoke with fellow officers, I remained acutely aware of my family's presence on the periphery of the crowd. Vicky had risen from her seat the moment the ceremony ended, her face set in hard lines as she tried to navigate toward the exit. But the crowd was thick with officers and their families, and every path she attempted seemed to lead her past someone who had heard Admiral Morrison's speech. I watched her try to slip between two groups of Navy wives, only to have both groups turn away from her with pointed deliberateness. She was being shunned. Publicly, unmistakably shunned by the community she had spent 15 years dismissing as unimportant. Megan trailed behind her mother, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her phone was nowhere in sight. Her designer dress, which had probably been chosen to impress, now seemed garish and out of place among the dignified attire of military families. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. My father stood alone near the chairs, making no move to follow his wife or approach me. He looked lost, like a man who had suddenly realized he was standing in the wreckage of choices he had made years ago and was only now seeing the full cost. "Commander Donovan." I turned to find William Chen standing beside me, his expression warm despite the tears still glistening in his eyes. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for letting me be part of this, for giving me the chance to honor your mother the way my uncle always wanted to." "You're the one who made this possible," I replied. "If you hadn't bought that Purple Heart, if you hadn't reached out to Admiral Morrison, none of this would have happened." He shook his head. "I just returned what was stolen. The real heroes are up there." He nodded toward the shadow box in my arms. "And right here." Before I could respond, a commotion near the exit caught my attention. Vicky's voice, sharp and defensive, cut through the general murmur of conversation. It was a misunderstanding. I had no idea those medals were important to anyone. They were just sitting in a closet, collecting dust. Anyone would have done the same thing. A woman's voice responded, cold and clear. "No, anyone would not have done the same thing. My husband earned a Bronze Star in Vietnam. I would sooner cut off my own hand than sell it. What you did was despicable." I moved through the crowd toward the confrontation, still carrying my mother's shadow box. Officers parted to let me through, some of them following in my wake. Vicky stood surrounded by a small group of Navy wives, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. One of the women, a silver-haired matriarch whose husband I recognized as a retired vice admiral, had stepped directly into her path. "You sold a Purple Heart," the woman continued, her voice carrying across the reception area. "A medal that represents blood shed in service to this country. You sold it to pay for a birthday party, and now you want to call it a misunderstanding." Vicky's eyes found me in the crowd. Something flickered across her face. Not quite fear, but close to it. For the first time in 15 years, she could not dismiss me. She could not wave away my existence with a cutting comment or a condescending smile. She was trapped, surrounded by people who finally saw her for exactly what she was. "Rachel," her voice was tight, controlled. "I think we should discuss this privately, as a family." "Family?" The word came out sharper than I intended. You've spent 15 years making it clear I'm not part of your family. You erased my mother from that house piece by piece. You sold her medals while I was deployed, knowing I couldn't stop you. And now you want to have a private family discussion." The crowd had gone silent. Every eye was on us. I could feel the weight of their attention, their judgment, their support. Vicky's composure cracked further. "I did what I thought was best. That house needed to move forward. Your father needed to move forward. You can't expect everyone to live in the past forever just because you refuse to let go of a woman who's been dead for 15 years. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was audible. Even Megan winced at her mother's words. I looked at Vicky for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm and steady, the voice I used on the bridge when giving orders during a crisis. "I spent 15 years being quiet so you could be comfortable. I swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every attempt to erase my mother and minimize my achievements, because I thought keeping the peace was more important than fighting for my own dignity." I lifted the shadow box slightly, letting the medals catch the light. My mother spent her career being loud so her crew could survive. She ran into fires. She gave orders that saved lives. She never stayed silent when speaking up could make a difference. Vicky's jaw tightened. "Rachel, this isn't the place." "You're right, this isn't the place for a private family discussion. This is the place where the naval community honors its own. And today, they honored my mother. They honored her sacrifice. They honored her legacy." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You can sell the medals, Vicky, but you can never erase the sacrifice. You can never undo what she accomplished. And you can never make me ashamed of being her daughter." I turned away from her then, dismissing her the way she had dismissed me countless times over the years. But unlike her dismissals, mine was witnessed. 400 people saw me turn my back on Victoria Donovan. 400 people saw her standing alone, stripped of the power she had wielded over my family for so long. The silver-haired Navy wife stepped closer to me, her expression soft with understanding. "Well said, Commander. Your mother raised you right." "Thank you, ma'am." Behind me, I heard Vicky's heels clicking rapidly across the pavement as she finally made her escape. Megan hurried after her, but not before casting one last look in my direction. Her expression was complicated. Shame, certainly, but also something else. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding. I did not have time to dwell on it. More officers approached to offer their respects. Admiral Morrison's wife found me and wrapped me in a warm embrace, whispering that she had known my mother at the academy and had never forgotten her kindness. William Chen introduced me to his wife and children, all of whom had grown up hearing stories about the officer who saved their uncle's life. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere outside the Navy. I felt like I had a community that extended beyond the hull of my ship. About 20 minutes later, I noticed my father making his way toward me. He moved slowly, hesitantly, like a man approaching a wounded animal. The crowd parted for him, but not with the warmth they had shown me. Their expressions were neutral, watchful, waiting to see what he would do. He stopped a few feet away from me, his eyes red-rimmed, and his hands trembling slightly at his sides. "Rachel," his voice cracked on my name. I don't know what to say." I looked at him, my father, the man who had held me when I cried as a child, the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with my homework, the man who had let his second wife systematically erase his first wife's memory while his daughter watched in silence. "Then don't say anything," I replied quietly. "Not yet, not until you figure out what you actually mean." His face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, Rachel, I should have protected her things. I should have protected you. Vicky made everything so complicated, and I was tired, and I thought if I just went along with it, eventually things would settle down and everyone would be happy. Everyone except me. Everyone except Mom's memory." He flinched as if I had struck him. I know. God, Rachel, I know I failed you both. I've been failing you for 15 years and I don't know how to fix it." "I'm not sure you can," I said honestly. "But if you want to try, you can start by choosing. Not today, not this minute, but soon. You can choose whether you want to be part of a family that honors Mom's memory or whether you want to keep pretending she never existed." His tears fell freely now, dropping onto his navy blue suit. "I loved her, Rachel. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I loved her more than anything." "Then prove it. Stop letting someone else decide what her memory is worth." I did not wait for his response. I turned and walked toward the reception hall, where Admiral Morrison was waiting to introduce me to more officers and their families. Behind me, my father stood alone on the parade ground, weeping for the wife he had lost and the daughter he had failed. I did not look back. The reception lasted for several more hours, but I barely noticed the time passing. Officer after officer approached to shake my hand, share memories of my mother, or simply express their support. Admiral Morrison stayed close, making introductions and ensuring I had the chance to connect with everyone who had known Commander Sarah Donovan during her years of service. "Your mother saved my life during a training exercise in 1992, a retired commander told me, his weathered hands gripping mine firmly. "We were caught in rough seas, and she held on to me for 45 minutes until rescue arrived. I've told that story to my grandchildren 100 times. They know her name, Commander. They'll always know her name." Stories like that flowed throughout the afternoon. Each one added another layer to my understanding of who my mother had been outside our home, outside her role as my mom. She had touched so many lives. She had shaped so many careers. She had left a legacy that extended far beyond the medals Vicky had tried to sell. William Chen found me again near the end of the reception. His family had already said their goodbyes, but he had lingered, wanting one more moment. "I want you to have something," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a worn photograph, its edges soft with age. "My uncle carried this in his wallet until the day he died." I took the photograph carefully. It showed a younger version of my mother in her working uniform, standing on the deck of a ship with the sun setting behind her. She was smiling, that rare, unguarded smile I remembered from my childhood. "He took it the week after she pulled him from that fire," William explained. "He said it was his reminder that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they wear officers' caps and run toward danger when everyone else runs away." My vision blurred. I had to blink several times before I could speak. "Thank you," I managed. "I don't have words for what this means." "You don't need words," he replied. "Just keep being who you are, keep honoring her memory. That's all the thanks anyone needs." He embraced me briefly, a gesture that felt like a benediction, and then he was gone, walking out to join his family in the parking lot. I stood alone for a moment, holding the photograph, letting the weight of the day settle into my bones. The shadow box rested on a nearby table, waiting to accompany me back to my quarters aboard the Roosevelt. My mother's medals were home again, not in the house where she had once lived, but with me, where they belonged. Commander Donovan. I turned to find a young ensign approaching, her expression tentative. "The Admiral asked me to let you know that your father is waiting outside. He requested a moment to speak with you before you leave, if you're willing." I considered refusing. The day had already been emotionally exhausting, and I was not certain I had anything left to give to a conversation that might only bring more pain. But something in me needed closure, needed to say the words I had been holding back for 15 years. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes." I found my father standing near the entrance to the parking lot, his suit rumpled and his face haggard. Vicky's car was nowhere to be seen. He was alone. "She left," he said when I approached. "Took Megan and drove back to the hotel. Said she couldn't stay another minute in a place where people were looking at her like that." He laughed bitterly. "Funny, she's never cared how people looked at you." "Where does that leave you?" He shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, standing in a parking lot trying to figure out how I let everything go so wrong." He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "You were magnificent up there, Rachel. When they announced your name, when they talked about what you've accomplished, I was so proud and so ashamed, because I should have been telling people about your achievements all along. I should have been the one making sure everyone knew what my daughter had become." "Yes," I agreed quietly. "You should have. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I can't undo what happened or bring back the years I wasted being a coward." His voice broke. "But I want you to know that I see now. I see what I let Vicky do to your mother's memory. I see what I let her do to you, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to make it right." I studied his face, searching for the father I remembered from childhood. He was still there, buried beneath layers of weakness and compromise. The man who had taught me to ride a bicycle. The man who had stayed up late helping me with science projects. The man who had cried at my mother's funeral and promised to always be there for me. "I don't know if we can go back to what we had," I told him honestly. "Too much has happened. Too much has been lost." "I know. But I'm not closing the door, not completely." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "You have my number. You know how to reach me. If you decide you want to be part of my life again, a real part, not just someone who shows up occasionally and lets his wife insult me, then call me. We can start there." His eyes filled with fresh tears. "Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for even that much." "Don't thank me yet. Just figure out who you want to be, Dad, and then be that person." I did not embrace him. The distance between us was too vast for that kind of gesture to feel genuine. But I did reach out and touch his arm briefly, a small acknowledgement of the connection that still existed beneath all the pain. Then I walked away, toward the car that would take me back to base. I did not look back this time either, but somehow it felt different. Not like abandonment, more like the first step toward something new. 2 weeks later, I stood in my quarters aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, watching the Virginia coastline disappear as we headed out to sea. My mother's shadow box hung on the wall across from my bunk, positioned so it would be the first thing I saw every morning and the last thing I saw every night. Someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Petty Officer Williams standing in the passageway, holding a small wooden plaque. "The crew wanted you to have this, Commander. We took up a collection and had it made special." I accepted the plaque and read the inscription. "In honor of Commander Sarah Donovan and Commander Rachel Donovan. 2 generations of service, 1 unbreakable legacy. From the crew of USS Theodore Roosevelt, with respect and admiration." Below the inscription, someone had carved an anchor encircled by the words, "Carry it forward." My throat tightened. "Williams, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, ma'am. You've already said everything that matters," he smiled. "The crew asked me to tell you that we've got your back, always. Whatever you need, whatever happens, you're one of us." After he left, I mounted the plaque beneath my mother's shadow box. The 2 pieces hung together perfectly, telling a story that spanned generations. I thought about Vicky, probably back in Virginia Beach, seething over her public humiliation. I thought about Megan, forced to reckon with the true cost of her lavish birthday party. I thought about my father, standing at a crossroads I could not navigate for him. But mostly, I thought about my mother. She had asked me to carry the anchor forward, to honor the legacy she had built, to never let them forget. I looked at her medals gleaming in the soft light of my quarters, at the photograph William Chen had given me, at the plaque my crew had made. "I did it, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "I carried it forward." The ship's engines hummed beneath my feet, carrying me back to sea, back to the life I had chosen. The life my mother had prepared me for. Behind me lay 15 years of silence and erasure. Ahead lay the open ocean and whatever challenges it would bring. I was ready for all of it.